It's a pleasure to introduce Mr. Knapp, longtime friend of Ocean and luminary in our fields. And Todd was gracious enough to join us on our first cybersecurity event with Venture Cafe. So Todd, why don't you take it away, man?
Well, thank you very much. I think in the future, if I'm ever going to have anyone introduce me, I'm going to say, don't use the word luminary. I'm not sure that anyone can live up to that. So, but
Sorry.
you know, I have to say, I was sitting over here with a big smile on my face just a minute ago, because I got to say that you guys could not have segued me better into the kinds of things I'm thinking about than talking about this issue of, you know, how people are functioning at home and what that disbursement of technology really looks and feels like. You know, for those of you who don't know me, you know, I'm the founder and CEO of Envision Technology Advisors, of course, but I spend a lot of my time traveling around the country and meeting with, you know, people in the industry that are trying to think about what's next. And almost all of my conversations since this event really began have been around what's next, and what the impacts are, you know, socially, economically, from a technology point of view and a security point of view. I spent my whole morning this morning with two psychologists and a neuroscientist talking about the effect of institutional trauma when you have a population of people that all experience similar trauma, and how that changes the way that they think and the way that they work and the way that they interact in the future. You know, to me, we've got an unprecedented problem in the history of technology, really, or at least the modern technology. You know, we have been talking a lot today about you know, cybersecurity, almost in an abstraction a little bit. You know, it's what are hackers doing, and how do we talk to our users about cybersecurity? But I think that there's, you know, especially in the corporate world, a pretty significant nuance here. So, you know, I'm a whiteboard kind of guy, so I can't really like exist without my whiteboard. You know, I think about how we've traditionally functioned, sort of in this, you know, if you're seeing my whiteboard, sort of this light. Our data exists in the center of this diagram, right? And our data is produced, and maybe within the network, it resides largely in our networks, and our networks might include, you know, some cloud might be in there. We might have some databases, structured data sources that we store our information in. And then, ooh, look at my ruler there. And then we've got some, you know, kind of conventional server infrastructure on which we store our data. Our users are accessing that data through devices, and within the context of those devices, they are using applications that are corporate owned. They are generating information sort of on network for all intents and purposes. And this is the world we've lived in for a really long time. And the value of this, of what we're seeing here, is that this world, what's consistent about it is that everything that I've been talking about exists under company control. And I think that is the fundamental thing that we have seen change very, very suddenly, is that right now, our users aren't at the bottom of this stack anymore. This isn't where they live. Our users are now off to the right here. So here's our user population. We sent them all home very suddenly. A lot of companies, not all companies, but a lot of companies sent these people home and said, okay, we've got your VPN that you can use to work. So we got some network level VPN stuff going on. Take home your company device. Or we're going to give you access to some kind of remote desktop session, an RDS, a Citrix session, a VMware session, whatever it is. But above and beyond that, they also have their personal home devices. They've got BYOC, bring your own cloud. They also have this other big red word, family. And I think we're underestimating just how significant this shift is, because when they were on net, we understood how to manage them at some level. And I just heard it a minute ago from Richard. When they're on net, their devices are getting patched. When they're on net, I can see how they're using my systems, and I kind of trust that within the confines of the four walls of my building, I can control the flow of information that's occurring. And that is not true anymore. When they're remote and they're accessing via VPN, they're ideally accessing from some form of company-owned device, but a lot of them are not. A lot of them we saw, I mean, and this happened, by the way, with companies that approached my company, immediately after this began, people we had never done business with that called us up and said, we know that you guys sell, SonicWall or Cisco or, any number of firewall manufacturers. We need more VPN licenses. And we were saying, well, okay, we can certainly sell you VPN licenses. How are your users using those VPN licenses? Well, we're putting them on their home computers. I actually had one company that I did a call with that, in all seriousness, said to me, we've got a plan that we're going to start on next week. We're going to have our employees 10 at a time unplug their computers from under their desk and bring them home and plug them in and make sure they work. And and I said, oh, great. So all those devices are encrypted, right? We're not going to have them stop at a 7-Eleven and get their car broken into and the computer stolen, like what happened when we had the Veterans Affairs data breach, many years ago. That's how that happened. There was no thought given to any of that. There has been a incredible ends justify the means approach to making our workforce suddenly mobile, and not in portion, the entire workforce. We suddenly had to make them mobile. And so everybody has said, is this really secure? All right, no, I get it, but extenuating circumstances, extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. That's another way of saying the ends justify the means. And when we say extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures, on average, the person that hears that says, yes, I agree, that's a battle cry. If we say ends justify the means, everybody goes, oh, that's bad language. Wait, that's not true, right? If we realize they're synonymous, what we can recognize is that we've made a lot of bad choices in a lot of companies around the country in the last 4 weeks. We've made a lot of decisions to let people connect node level connections back to our networks with home devices that we can't necessarily control. We sent people home with company devices, and they're suddenly homeschooling their kids, and they've got family members that are in the house that we've never had using our devices before. And a lot of those people, and I mean, I have personal experience with this. I got a lot of family in Vermont. I grew up in Vermont. They're not known for having a lot of great technology in the homes in Vermont. There are people up there that are still thrilled to death with the electric light bulb. I've got my sister, and I'm talking to her, and she's telling me about how she works remotely. And I said, and she was telling me about a problem she's having. And I said, well, are you in front of your computer now? And she said, no, my son's using it. My son's using it? This is a thing. The people that are in the household that are surrounding our remote workers right now are not the same people that are normally surrounding them. When our devices are in our office, we don't have to worry that some unauthorized user is sitting down at them and using them. We don't have to worry that somebody's downloading some hashed together version of Angry Birds to keep their kid busy in the moment, so that now we've got this piece of malware on the system we weren't anticipating. We've got a very different problem right now. And let's not forget too, that we're also talking about the generation of content, where it's born, right? In this picture that I had over here on the left side of my whiteboard, our data is being born right here, right in the center of a network that is under our corporate control, inside our umbrella. Your content is now being born outside your four walls. Maybe it's being born on that office computer, but here's a situation, again, I'm drawing from personal experience. My wife's company has very, very locked down systems. Now, my wife is actually normally a remote worker, but I can't help but think she works for a very, very big company. What portion of their workforce were not, and now went home with these extremely locked down devices, to a degree that they're actually not able to be as functional as they would like or need to be. And so they start producing content on their own systems, on devices that are not company owned, and then transferring that content to devices that are, right? The other thing that I would challenge us all to think about is the human aspect of what's going on from a cybersecurity point of view. So I'm gonna just share my screen real briefly here. And there we go. Okay, so you guys have all probably seen this before. This is Maslow's hierarchy. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And Maslow's hierarchy is a conversation about how human beings process stress and risk and wellness and esteem, right? And so the idea is that the most basic things that we need out of life can be found at the bottom of the hierarchy under physiological needs: air, food, water, shelter, sleep. And that if we don't have those needs met, we're unable to attend to any of the needs above it. Personal security, health, employment under safety. I've been arguing for the last few weeks that when we talk about remote workforce and even cybersecurity, that there is an alignment that the company itself has its own Maslow's hierarchy. That at the lowest level of the company, we need market demand and ability to deliver. That as we move up to the chain, we need capable people and the right tool sets, but that by itself does not create culture or trust. That to do that, we need tools like what we're using right now with Zoom to create relationships and bonds. And that, you know, we need new facilities for recognition, and that the highest level of Maslow for a company is the ability to be profitable and do something that has meaning. Right? And if you're in a nonprofit business, then the highest level of Maslow is to not be in the red and do things that have meaning, right? So, you know, it's different for every company, but this maps to how we think about cybersecurity, and I'll tell you why. It maps because when we are unable as individuals to have confidence in those lower two levels of Maslow, physiological needs and safety needs, when the fundamental health of our bodies is threatened in ways that we can't clearly define, we stop thinking as individuals about higher level functions like cybersecurity. Our users are inexorably and undeniably focused on some other things right now. We can send them home to work. We can remind them that phishing is a threat. We can remind them that generation of content is only to be done on their home devices. But, you know, I mean, thinking about Jesse's presentation earlier, you know, the recognition of a threat like phishing is secondary to our own physical health. Our users are not thinking like this right now. This isn't where their heads are at. They're, you know, every single minute of every day right now, I am sitting at home working away, and I'm being bombarded by clients that have employees that are in critical care. I have 3 clients right now that have lost somebody. I have much bigger things on my mind than whether or not I have validated the link in the email that is coming through. I have much bigger things to think about than whether or not the piece of content that I'm about to open from one of my colleagues was actually generated in a system that is under the control and influence of Envision, and whether or not that content is peripherally infected with something that I'm not anticipating. I have bigger things to think about right now than whether or not I actually stored the information that I've generated in the right place for my organization, where it can be discovered later and leveraged later, and where it isn't exposed to risk, right? I have an organization that I'm working with that has a lot of tools for collaboration with their customer base. And their employees can drop a file in a folder and it is private. If they drop a file in a different folder, it is shared. How many of their employees, in the midst of the stresses that they're enduring on social media and in the news and in their own personal lives, how many of them that are now afraid of their UPS guy when he shows up at the door, which, by the way, happened to me yesterday. I had a UPS guy show up, like walked up onto my desk, knocked on my glass door. I was like, what? Like, what are you doing? No mask, no gloves, no nothing. And like, I kind of, from behind the glass door, I'm trying to explain to him, just put it on the deck, you know, like, and then I walked away and I'm thinking, what? I'm afraid of my UPS guy? That's the world I live in right now? And then I went back and I started filing some things on my computer. Did I put them in the right place? Or did I drag them into a folder that is actually shared with an external resource? Our data footprint following this event is broader and wider than it has ever been in the history of modern technology. We have an audit obligation when this is over to try and now track down and rope in all this content and information that's being generated on the fly. We have to think very, very big about this. And by the way, if that isn't a big enough problem, let's not forget about the number of companies out there that rapidly deployed these remote tools, and they don't really kind of work all that well. Their VPNs drop arbitrarily, or they're using a virtual desktop that doesn't support cut and paste between windows, and so things aren't working quite right. And so you know what happens in a world when your employees don't have the technology they need to be effective and productive? They bring their own. And so the language that we use, and back, looking on my whiteboard, second one underneath family, BYOC, bring your own cloud. How many of your employees tried to use the tool that you asked them to use, got frustrated with it because they weren't trained or didn't understand it or it didn't work quite right, and they said to their friends or their other coworkers, you know what, to heck with it, I'm just going to drop it in my Dropbox and I'll send it to you there. I'm going to put it in my OneDrive and I'll share it to you that way. I'm going to put it into my Jungle Drive. I'm going to throw this thing up. I'll send it in my Google Drive, or send it to you in email. How much of that is happening around us, right? I actually was talking with a medical practice, and they were trying to deal with a telemedicine issue. And we talked to them about shadow IT. And when we started talking about shadow IT, we deployed a couple of tools to try and identify what applications their docs were actively using. And we found no less than 8 different tools for video conferencing that various docs had picked out of the clear blue sky because they liked it, they knew it, they were used to it before. And honestly, it was easier for them to do that with their patient than it was to use the thing that we were asking them to use, because they had familiarity with it. And guess what? They really were not all that secure. So all of a sudden, we're looking at it and going, wow, we have a giant shadow IT problem. People who aren't great with technology to begin with, so they fall back to the thing they know. So, we've got an unprecedented cybersecurity problem ahead of us. And I would add to that a mandate. The mandate is that we have got a new paradigm under which we work. I'm going to give you real quickly 5 reasons off the top of my head why distributed workforce is now permanently part of our lives forever. Number 1, our government and our employers, I'm a CEO, I'm going to say to my employees at some point, I think the risk is acceptable. We're reopening the office. At some level, we want people to start coming back in. And some population of my employees is going to say, well, you think the risk is acceptable. I don't. I'm not coming back. I'm not ready. I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable. People are traumatized. There's long institutional memory. Number 2, we're going to have some population of employees that say, I just spent 15 weeks, 16 weeks, however long this lasts, proving that I can work remotely. Why is it even a mandate that I come into the office? How is that actually part of my job? I've gotten used to this. I'm productive this way. I want to be a permanent distributed employee. I'm going to have some population that are going to say, I'm going to have management that's going to say, well, geez, by having a portion of my workforce distributed, I am actually more resilient to the next event. I prefer it this way. I'm going to have some management teams that discover that by facilitating fully remote employees at some level, that I can hire anywhere in the country. And I now have access to a national employee base. And that, oh, by the way, that person that I was going to hire in accounting might be $30,000 a year cheaper if I hire them in North Carolina or South Carolina than if I hire them here in New England. So there's a whole lot of reasons why this is not going away. So as IT professionals, business owners, management teams, and executives, we have a mandate now to not only backfill the giant problem that's been created when we suddenly rushed to make everybody functional off-site and took a ends justify the means approach under the banner of extraordinary times, extraordinary measures. Yes, we have to backfill and fix that. We also now need to retrofit and prepare our environments for a world where this is not going to change. This is the new norm. So we need to move to architectures and designs that natively support things like single sign-on and that natively support shadow IT discovery, and that natively support security of information in our environments. I'm a big Microsoft advocate, but you can do it in any number of ecosystems. But by putting identity at the top of the stack and starting there and saying, I'm going to begin by understanding who my user is and what context they are trying to access the information under, right? Do I know that David is David, right? I've known him for a long time, right? David wants to access, he provides me the right username and password. Maybe he even provides me the right MFA. Well, okay, is he coming from a device that I recognize? Is he coming from a location that I recognize? Is he coming from a device that has active antivirus and malware prevention on it? What kind of data is he trying to access? Is it tagged? So do I have an Azure Information Protection label on the data so that I understand what the content is? Is he accessing it from a device that's on a wireless network that I feel is secured? Does the information that he's trying to open have mandate around it, that it needs to be able to check in over the internet to validate that it's currently able to be accessed? These are tools that exist in the world right now. By making a decision today that we're going to recognize that distributed workforce is now part of the world's new normal, now and for the foreseeable future. And so that in order to meet that mandate, we have to retrofit our infrastructure. We could acknowledge that we need a generation of security technologies that we've never really had at our disposal before, that they exist in the world, and that we need to actively pursue them. Things that allow us to do that kind of contextual analysis so that every single time that we have an access that occurs in the environment, we have the context around that access, and that we're using that context to make heuristic decisions about level of risk, and that our systems know how to respond when the level of risk is not tolerable. So I just dropped like a million things on everybody here, and I think I was supposed to run maybe 20 minutes, and I'm at 22 right now. I'll take a second and just ask a question of the entire group here. Give me a scale of 1 to 10. All I want you guys to do is type in one number into the chat. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is you feel like your environments today are able to provide that kind of heuristic risk assessment, where your users today are already designed for complete agility as opposed to remote, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is we're totally agile. We have absolute visibility and security when our users are outside. We're leveraging cloud. To 1, we really are not anywhere near where we need to be. Where do you think your organizations fall today? Fives, ones, sixes, eights. I saw an 8. There's another 8. Fives. Yeah, this is pretty consistent with what I see when I ask the question when I'm in a larger group. Is I get about a third of the group that'll raise their hands and say, yeah, I think I'm better than a 7, and I get about a third of the group that says, yeah, we're a 4 to 7, maybe closer to a 3, I don't know. And then we've got some population that just says, yeah, we're nowhere. I think that we've got, I saw Jesse, I saw 1 in there. Yeah, I did too. I think the funny thing about this is that cybersecurity, one of the mistakes I think we've made as a industry in IT is that we treat cybersecurity like it's an individual responsibility of a company. And in fact, cybersecurity protection, real protection, is more like how we try to manage COVID right now. We're saying social distancing is necessary because your health is my health. My neighbor's health is my health. If they don't take precautions, I'm not safe. Well, look at the numbers that we just saw flow through a minute ago. We've got a small community in Rhode Island. I know with absolute certainty that some of my information resides on some of your networks. If you're not secure, I'm not secure. This is a shared culture of responsibility. And if we don't together decide that, yes, we've done what we had to do, and maybe that was the best we could do, but now we need to go back and clean it up. If we don't decide that this is a possibility again in the future and that we're going to do better in terms of thinking, the language I hear a lot sometimes is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. My dad used to say that to me a lot. And it was wisdom coming from my elders. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm not sure that's wisdom anymore. I think that these days we look at applications inside our network that are not natively cloud centric, but that work really well and that everybody understands, and we're inclined not to change them because the business uses it heavily and it works for the business. I'm not sure that's a good enough reason anymore. I think that in order to be viable, our apps need to natively support the kind of technology I'm talking about, the kind of security that I'm talking about. And if they don't, it's time to shake it up.